أولا أشياء أولا. First thing first. Soon before the start of the World War II, retired Prime Minister Sergei Witt made a profound observation in his memoirs. According to him, Russia owed its international standing, to its army or the armed forces. Russia owed its stature, a highly enviable stature in the community of nations, not to its culture, not to its bureaucratic church, not to its wealth, and not to its prosperity. It owed each and everything to its army or the armed forces. Dear viewers, these are my opening remarks about a highly comprehensive perspective of defense and security expert Pravin Sawhnney, who has spoken at length about nuclear armament, nuclear testing, nuclear systems, nuclear operations, military doctrines, etc., etc. Let's listen into him first.
We talk of nuclear testing or nuclear issues, then we go back to the fundamentals, the basics, and we know that the nuclear theology maximum it came out during the Cold War, because this was the time in the Cold War that there were two nuclear superpowers, the Americans and the Soviets. So what I have done is I have picked up two themes or two ideas from this nuclear theology which are relevant to my discussion and relevant to modern war, and that is what I'll discuss. I was given two options. One was that let's match the capabilities, conventional capabilities of the Soviets. He rejected this option. The second option was entirely different, which was thought through by the American strategist of the time. And that was that when it comes to big bombs, which is the strategic nuclear weapons which can wipe out cities, America had far more numbers than the Soviets. Now, this was the reality, and therefore, the American strategists suggested let's introduce tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield. Tactical nuclear weapons are weapons with low yields. The whole idea was that these tactical nuclear weapons, on the one hand, they will stop the conventional forces offensive of the Soviet Union well before it comes to the front line. And on the other hand, because the Soviets did not have as many big bombs as the Americans had, the Soviet will not get into a nuclear war because the escalation will happen and they will not be able to match the numbers of the Americans in the big bombs. Now, this was a weird logic, but for whatever reason, it was never put to test. So, this was America's first offset strategy, which was the introduction of nuclear weapons on the battlefield. Next, what happened was that by the 1970s, the Americans once again realized that the battlefield situation had changed. Now, the Soviets had as many big bombs as the Americans, they had as many tactical nuclear weapons as the Americans, and they still had large conventional forces, but in certain key technologies, now their conventional forces were at par with the Americans. So once again, they had an advantage and that needed to be offset. And that first offset strategy has run its course because now the Soviets had big bombs like the Americans had the numbers. So something else needed to be done. So the Americans said, all right, tactical nuclear weapons won't work. Now let us look at using non nuclear capabilities at long ranges with precision. Non nuclear capabilities. And when we use this, then we can stop the offensive of the Soviet Union conventional forces in the tracks before it comes to the front line. And this was called the second offset strategy. Of course, it was never tested by the Americans against the Soviets, but this was tested by the Americans against Iraq in the 1991 Gulf War, which the world said was a new war. It was a war about shock and awe. Because for the first time, the Americans had revealed something entirely different, a combination of battle networks, space capabilities, and PGMs, which is the precision guided munition. Now, the lesson that came out from the first and the second offset strategy was rather simple, that when it comes to conventional war and nuclear war, credible deterrence has to be built separately. You need credible conventional deterrence and you need credible nuclear deterrence. One does not support the other. This lesson even holds true today. It has not changed. You need separate, credible deterrence for both.
The US, prior to the formation of the USSR or the Soviet Union, Russia had largely struggled against a tragic vicious circle. And what was that vicious circle? Steep poverty warranted conquest. Conquest demanded the establishment of a large military establishment, and the large military establishment sapped the productive resources of people, perpetuating poverty. Let's listen into Pravin Sawhnney again.
Soviets were concerned. They had theorists, military theorists, and the job of the military theorist was to come up with ideas about warfare. Because the thinking was that the generals, the military leadership, they are caught so much in their day to day affairs that they do not have the time to think and work out all these things. So, ideas have to be given to them on the platter, and based on the ideas which are given to them, then they can work out the war concepts to optimize their chances of winning the war. So, there were military theorists and there were the strategists, the military strategists. Now, this word strategy comes from the Greek word which is art of the general. So, the job of the Soviet general staff was to take these ideas and make it into war concept. Unlike the Americans did not have the military theorist. They only had the strategist. And as far as the American strategies were concerned, they were very clear that when we look at the battlefield, there are only two things, there is tactics and there is strategy. Strategy is what happens at the highest level where the military and the political leadership interact with one another. Everything else is tactics for the Americans. That means, as far as the Americans are concerned, even at the lowest level, which is at the front line, the junior leaders should have a sense of art of maneuver because they are involved in it. Now, as far as the military theorists of the Soviets were concerned, they said no, we do not accept these two levels only. They said yes, tactics is what is the front line, but when you go deep inside, the situation changes. So, why not have capabilities and techniques which can hit non nuclear, all of them, which can hit at the depth? So, they said at the depth, what will happen is that let's call that the operational level of war. So, the point to make is that it was the Soviet theorist, military theorist, who came up with this idea of the operational level of war. And after that, this was tested in the Second World War by the military strategists, the general staff of the Soviet Union, and this was found to be good. It was found to be credible. So, operational level of war has been contributed by the Soviets.
Reviewers, it was by the end of the 1950s that the theorists, Soviet military theorists, Soviet military strategists and thinkers started debating the then existing Soviet military doctrine. And it was in the middle of the 1980s that the very military doctrine, the Soviet military doctrine, underwent a revisit or re-evaluation. The first Gulf War reviewers provided the Soviet military theorists a golden opportunity, a really golden opportunity to form up their conclusion about the war in the future. I'm Sarfraz Ahmad, based in Karachi. من يا أجابو سرفراز أحمد يا ربوت دوا جزتا. أنا سرفراز أحمد نائب رئيس التحرير في الجريدة Karachi. I'm a student of Indology, Sovietology, Middle Eastern Studies, and Semitic languages. Thank you for watching this video.